All right, before we start, I just want to mention there was an assignment that was due on Monday that some of you have turned in, some of you have not turned in. It was the HTML text, Chapter 7, Exercise 1, Responsive, and it's this one right, oh, where is it? I guess I didn't open it, so I'll open it now. This one right here was just the one page. Let's zoom in on it. Read and write the code from that following tutorial at CSS3 Media Query. Read and complete the following tutorials on CSS Flexbox. Build a website from the tutorial from Hussey, and build the tutorial from the Derek Banis. If you've turned it in, then don't worry about it. But like I said, about 5 people have turned it in, which means about 5 people have not. All right, I'll take it through Sunday, but Sunday I'm going to grade, and I'll be grading probably till about 8 o'clock or so. So if you have it in by then, okay, but I just would hate to see people, because it's worth 100 points. So if you don't turn it in, you lose 100 points. I don't want to see anybody that happen to anyone. Again, just very quickly, so you remember this. Today, we're going over Chapter 11 right now. You took the written test. Next Monday will be lab the entire period. By Monday, I'll have the Path of Light for Chapter 11 put out there on the system for you. Tuesday will also be lab, and it'll be lab from 8:05 until 11:30. Then at 11:30, we'll do a test review for the Chapter 11 written. Wednesday then, we'll do the written test at the beginning of class. Remember, as I told you before, I'm not going to give you a written and a hands-on the same day. So what that means is that this hands-on test will be given Thursday, not Wednesday. All right, which will mean that Friday, instead of it being lab the entire period, we will go over Chapter 12 first, and then it'll be lab. Does all that make sense? Again, I'm not changing the syllabus, because then I just start changing it, and I just keep changing it and changing it all the time, and it's kind of stupid to do. So, all right. So I want to bring up. I had it up before. Unfortunately, I closed the browser down. So this is Chapter 11. By the time we get done with this chapter, which won't be long, we are more than 500 pages into this book that's about 600 pages. So we made a big dent in it, so to speak. Nice. So if you're following along in the book, I'm on page 473. Now, while we're waiting for this to warm up and show on the screen here, one of the reasons that HTML5 was created was audio and video, was multimedia, because there are so many different what are called codecs out there for audio and video, and some are supported by one browser and not supported by another, etc. All right. Remember, if you ever want to find out any of that stuff, we talked about this many, many weeks ago, but you can always go out to caniuse.com, and that will show you what's available in here. All right, so in other words, if I write in here, let's put video. All right, so there's different video things that are in there, okay, and I can put audio in, etc. All right, so describe the purpose of plugins, helper apps, media containers, and codecs, the type of files used on the web, how to hyperlink to media files, audio and video. Flash is not dead, but as far as Apple is concerned, it is dead. Basically, Apple supports almost no Flash whatsoever. All right, and the idea is eventually Flash will go away, and it'll be replaced by something that's HTML5 oriented. Java applets, we'll talk a little bit about those. All right. Creating an interactive drop-down menu with CSS. Now, I got an email this morning from Eric, who couldn't be here, but he asked me about the fourth homework assignment, because it says in there you're supposed to do a carousel. All right. And you can do a carousel in many ways. The easiest way to do a carousel uses jQuery, which we haven't talked about yet. All right. So you can do a carousel using jQuery. You can do a carousel using just JavaScript, or you can do a carousel and set it up with just CSS. So that's what I sent him. Plus Bootstrap, if you're going to do a Bootstrap website, has a carousel feature built into it. But a carousel, if you don't know what it is, typically it's at the top of a home page on a website, and it might have 4 or 5 pictures that at different increments every 2 or 3 or 5 seconds change on the screen. Might be pictures of products, might be pictures of a company, might be pictures of employees, whatever, or any combination thereof. All right. Configure CSS transform and transition properties. Describe some common uses. So this is the first time we're actually going to talk a little bit about JavaScript. Describe the purpose of HTML5 APIs. And I'm asking this question. I'm not trying to put you on the spot. I'm really not. Anybody know what API stands for? Okay. It's an application program interface. For lack of better words, keeping it as simple as possible, it's kind of a contract between you and the software, where the software says, I'll provide these services for you, and you say, since you're providing me these services, I'll agree to use them in the way that I'm supposed to use them. All right, that's in a nutshell, that's what an API is. All right, describe features and common uses of AJAX. And AJAX, again, not trying to be funny, not AJAX like cleaner or anything. AJAX is an acronym, and it stands for Asynchronous JavaScript and XML. All right, so we'll talk about that. You'll see it in a little bit. Describe some features and common uses of jQuery. And then finally, the author ends by talking about different places that you can go for Java Applet, JavaScript, AJAX, and jQuery resources that exist out on the web. All right. So as we mentioned, there are many different audio and video types. Some of the major types are shown here, and this is the 2 tables that are on page 475 in the book. All right. As an example, all right, you see what you don't see here. Oh, I guess it's down here. Are common video types, and if you'll notice under here, .mp4, which are MPEG-4. Reason I bring those up is when I use Camtasia like this, my files are saved, or I choose to save them into an MP4 format. All right, so it's got both my audio and video on it. These are basically just audio types. And I don't know, I'm not asking, but maybe you've listened to a podcast at some time in your life, which is basically just audio. You know, if they're interviewing somebody and you don't really, they're doing it in a studio and they might just record the audio. All right. Video, of course, will have the video and the audio in it. So, they talk about some of this stuff, and again, I don't know how well this resonates on here, so let me copy it and put it on here so it's a little bit bigger. Do that. And blow it up a bit. Hopefully that's big enough where everybody here can see it, what I've shown up here. What they're saying here is the easiest way to provide a hyperlink to either an audio or a video file is to just use the href. That's the easiest way to do it. This is literally right out of your book on page 476. All right. But what we've been doing so far is we've always had a website in here. But now instead of a website, we've got an MP3. Now, it's possible, in this case, since we've got WDF podcast.mp3, that podcast, that file better be in the same location as our HTML file is. If it's not in the same location, then what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to provide the path for it, starting with HTTP or HTTPS. All right? But that is the simplest way. And she actually has examples in here where if you go through them, you click on it, it just says, like, hi, this is an example of a podcast, just so you can hear what it sounds like. And then she goes through the steps to make a podcast. It's actually pretty interesting. There are a lot of people who have a presence out there on the web who virtually just do podcasts. All right, there are entertainers who do it, and there are people in the tech industry who do it, and there's people that you probably have never seen before that just whatever, people find them interesting. All right, and maybe you've heard about this, maybe you've seen this. What some people do is instead of a podcast, you go out to a website, they have a blog. And what do they blog? Well, it's kind of like they're tweeting, but it's bigger usually than tweets. But they're talking about their life or something they're interested in or whatever. All right? And some people literally have podcasts out on their blog site. All right? So they go through in here and they talk about, it says there are a number of ways you can obtain audio files. All right? But again, the idea is there are audio files that are out there that are free. All right, there are audio files that are out there that you pay for. You can create your own audio files, etc. And they go through some of that stuff in here. They talk about some of the best sites to go through, and they also talk about things in here like sampling rates, etc. All right. Now, you may or may not be aware of this, but if you go back into quote the olden days, like maybe the early 1900s or whatever, maybe around that time, when they started to really have movies that came out, and you look at them and they look real, they look weird. For one thing, they're black and white. For another thing, it looks really herky-jerky. Well, at that time, the sampling rate that they did on those movies was not nearly the sampling rate that's used today. All right? Again, maybe I've given this example before. Has anybody ever done this where you take a book, maybe as a little kid you did this, and what you do is you draw pictures on every page of the book where it makes it look like as you whip your way through it, like either a rocket's taking off or a rocket's landing type of thing? All right? It's that same kind of thing. If you do it really slow, it almost looks stupid. If you do it so slow, it's hard to even tell what's going on. If you do it too fast, you almost miss it. So what you want is you want to be able to do it at an optimum rate so you can tell what's happening. Well, sampling rates work the same way. As they say, it's a value related to the number of digital sound samples taken per second. All right? All right. They mentioned that just like with audio files, you can obtain video files in a lot of different ways. A couple things to remember on multimedia and accessibility issues. And again, this is all stuff, if you thought about it, I'm sure it'd make total sense to you. If someone's deaf, they're not going to get something out of a podcast. All right? So quite often when you have a podcast, and a lot of, I've taken some courses. It's kind of a neat site if you ever want to look at it. You don't have to now, but I think it's just edx.org. They have literally, that's it, edx.org. They literally have hundreds of free courses out there that you can take. Virtually every course that they have out there, and there probably are thousands, are free. All right? If you want, you can pay $50 per course, and then you get a certificate. If you don't want to, you audit the course and you do it for free. All right? So, the reason for telling you that is quite often when you go and you look at what they have in there and you go through a lesson, what they have is on the left-hand side, they've got the lesson that'll open up in a little window, a little where you can open up and it'll be on YouTube or whatever. Then on the right, they have a transcript. So somebody could actually watch it who was deaf, but could read the transcript and figure out what was going on. All right? And again, having the sound, having a podcast, when you think about it, if someone's blind, for them, a podcast would be the same as an entire, like watching a movie type of an idea. All right, so when they talk about accessibility issues, that's what they're talking about. All right, you have to try to accommodate every type of audience member you could possibly have. Okay. Browser compatibility issues, again, some older browsers have problems with certain kinds of audio and video. And as mentioned previously, Apple has limited support at best with something that's done using Flash. All right. Sometimes I don't understand enough about this that what I'm about to tell you, I don't get why it's the case. But sometimes if I'm out on a website and it says click here to see, I follow baseball a lot, and they'll say, this guy got hit with a pitch yesterday. Click here if you want to see the video and the fight that ensued afterwards. And I click and I watch it. Other times I'll do the same thing and it says your browser does not support this. But it's the same browser I used to watch it the day before that was with something similar. All right. I'm sure there's a rhyme and a reason behind it. I'm just not sure what it is. All right. I've talked enough about Flash, so I'm not going to say any more about it. One thing about this, though, and you probably have seen this stuff already, and that is, if I bring this up here, when you start to embed this stuff, you end up doing stuff that looks a lot like this. Now, the way you embed different kinds of files is different, but what I wanted to show you is here we're embedding, and it's showing the type, and it's saying that it's a Flash file, the name of it. This is how big your screen is going to be. All right, so it's going to be 640 by 100. You almost always put quality equal high in there because you want the highest quality possible. Unfortunately, sometimes even when you put quality high, if somebody creates something, maybe they're walking and they decide that they're going to create something as they're walking through a nature path or something like this. And the quality may or may not be good. So even when you put it on high, it might stink anyway. All right. A title for it, and there's other things too, and this would be the actual link. All right. That's just an example. Now, when I started to work with Camtasia, which now was probably over 10 years ago, everything I saved were saved as Flash files. They were all these are typically referred to as Swift files, right there. That's usually what they're known as. All right, and everything I did were Swift files. And lately, and I cross my fingers, knock on wood, whatever, I don't have a lot of problems when I use MP4. I had a lot of problems when I used Swift files. A lot of problems. Stuff would just stop working. I'd have a student say to me, halfway into this video, there's no sound, but it comes on at the end. All right, and I have had very, very few problems like that since I've left Flash and gone to the MP4, and that's one of the reasons I did that. All right, so they do have a hands-on practice in here, and I don't remember if you're assigned these or not. I don't think you are, but I could be wrong. But they run through this, and they have you put in the video here, or the picture, and I think when you click on it, it's going to play some stuff. All right. Then they give you some Flash resources. Anybody ever heard of this? Microsoft Silverlight. Anybody ever heard of that? Silverlight, for lack of better words, is Microsoft's alternative to Flash. All right? And you can actually get it to work with non-Microsoft devices. Probably about 10 years ago, we used to offer classes during the summer, and we'd let students figure out what they wanted to take, and then I'd try to learn it in a few weeks and then teach it. And in one summer, it was Silverlight, so I went over it. And it wasn't that it was that hard to use. It was a little awkward in its syntax, but it wasn't a hard package to use. All right. What will happen if my browser visitor uses, the browser my visitor uses does not support Flash? All All right, it says it'll display a message about needing that plugin. But again, if it's something like running it on a Mac, that won't help them anyway. All right. There are some similarities between audio and video and the elements that they have, but again, I want to say this to you one more time, as it says right here in the heading, HTML5 audio and video elements. One of the main reasons HTML5 has come to be is its support for audio and video. All right. So as it says, the new HTML audio element supports native play of audio files in the browser. That's the good news. The bad news is what I mentioned to you previously, and that is the fact that different browsers support different types of audio file or different types of video file. So quite often when you put this stuff in here, as you're going to see in a couple minutes, you've got to put a lot more than you probably think in there. So here's the stuff that you put in, source equals, etc. And this is what I wanted to show you right here. So again, let me copy this and bring it up in a window. All right. If you notice right here, that's the same exact line, except in one case, the extension is .mp3, and in the other case, the extension is .ogg. And again, you have to do that because some browsers support MP3 file format and some support what's called an OGG format. Now, the different types of formats, etc., they are given in your book here, and there is a, I don't know, someplace in here on page, and I don't know what page, but they do talk about it in here. They talk about some of the different formats. And if you look at it, you say, no, you're wrong, they really didn't or whatever, I can come in here and type in HTML5 audio, or let's do video. Video formats, all right? And that's going to push me sooner or later to W3 Schools or developer.mozilla, and here they are. So you notice there's quite a few of them, all right? And if I go down to video here for W3 Schools, they're going to talk about the different support and the different kinds of files. And so notice some of the major types are shown here, MP4, WebM, and OGG. There's more than these, but the key thing is this here. All right, notice that Microsoft Internet Explorer supports MP4, but not Web4 and not OGG. And everybody else other than Safari supports OGG. I could be wrong here. I believe OGG or OGG, I believe that's open source. That's ideally what everyone is going to move to in the future, but it hasn't happened yet. All right. So you'll notice that everyone supports MP4, not everyone supports WebM, and there are charts like this up the wazoo out on the internet that you can find this information. So when you bring it up, in the example in the hands-on here, they have you set this up. Set up something like this. And it's not hard. When you set this up, you basically tell them what you want to have happen on here. In other words, you can set it up so that it has a start, it has a stop, and it has a pause. You can set it up so that it begins playing automatically. You can set it up so that it has what's referred to as a poster. And what a poster is typically means that when you start this and you click, what happens first is you get a little image that comes up. So if it was going to be a movie about something, you might have a poster for the movie that might show for a few seconds, and then it goes into the video webcast or the podcast or whatever. But again, you're going to notice when you look in here, whether it's audio or video, they're going to be very, very similar. They're not identical with the format and all the way that this is all set up here, but they're very similar in the way that they're set up. All right. She's got a thing with her dog because this is Sparky, and it's throughout the book here. So, how can I convert a video file to the new codecs? All right, and they go through some of the stuff that's in here. Usually, notice there's a thing called fire fog. And what does that mean? When something starts with fire, normally it means that it was created by Firefox. And what Firefox oftentimes does is they put fire, and then on the other half they put what they're trying to do. Well, OGG means OGG files. So as it says, if you want to convert a video file to OGG, one way you can do it is by using Firefog. Okay. All right. Multimedia files and copyright. This is the middle of page 487 in the book. All right, it says, be aware there are times when students and educators can use portions of another person's work and are not in violation of copyright law. This is called fair use. For instance, let's say that I've chosen a book for the class that you're going to use next semester. In fact, we have. So we've got this book. And we think, wow, you know, this is a really cool book, and everything's just fine. Now, a week before the class starts, another book comes out by a different author and a different publisher, and it's got even cooler stuff in it. What I'm allowed to do as an educator is to take up to 15% of the pages in those books, in that book rather, and I can actually make copies and give it to you. All right. I had a teacher years ago when I was going for my master's degree, and what he did was he didn't like his students to have to buy books. So he found about 10 books that he really liked, and he took 15% of each book and made copies and then gave them to us. That was his textbook. You're not really supposed to do that, but he did it anyway. And a lot of us liked him because we didn't have to go spending, you know, 100, you know, some of those books for graduate school were well over $100 a book, and you may say, well, they are now too. That was back in the late 80s. So imagine what they cost now for some of those. All right. So, as it says, if you want to see if something is fair use, it must be educational rather than commercial. What that means in English, you're not trying to make money from it. All right. The nature of the work copied should be factual rather than creative. So you can't sit there and when somebody's explaining their theory of life or whatever, that's creative. That's not factual. The amount copied must be as small as possible, and the copy does not impede the marketability of the original work. In other words, if somebody goes out and starts copying, let's say the book is 500 pages, and for whatever reason they copy 400 of them, and they make it available online to people, that's not a good thing because they're taking money away. You probably have heard this kind of thing right now too, where a lot of musicians are really mad about the way that people can download music now, and they say how they're losing money, etc. It's the same type of an idea. All right. Okay. They also mention here, they talk about this Creative Commons license, and they say Creative Commons provides a free service that allows authors and artists to register a type of copyright license. You may or may not be aware of this. All right, what I'm about to show you, you may or may not be aware of. But if I'm sitting here and I am writing code, and this is going to be the world's simplest website. I'm not going to put in a doc type or anything else. So let's say all I put in the body there was a footer. That's it. And I put it here. And I don't have a JPS ink, but let's suppose I did. Oops. All right. Just by me putting in that, all right, just by putting in a copyright like that, if somebody goes and steals my stuff and I think I have a claim, a fair usage type of claim, one of the things they'll look at is, did you copyright what you did? That's one of the reasons that in your footer I've always recommended, not that you're creating something that somebody's going to copyright, I don't mean that, but the time may come when you create something and somebody else looks at it and says, wow, that's cool. They right mouse click, they choose view page source, boom, they've got the code now. And unless you somehow manage to set it up so they can't have your code, they've got your code. All right, CSS and interactivity. For some reason, starting on the bottom of 487 now, the author kind of changes focus and talks about a drop-down menu. If you look at the example here, does that make sense to everybody that if you take your mouse and you just put it on that menu option right there, that you'll get this drop-down? Does that make sense? You can do drop-down menus in a lot of different ways. You can use them, you can do them using CSS, you can do them using JavaScript, you can do them using jQuery. So there's a lot of different ways you can set this up. Most people use CSS because it's not that difficult. So they show you, this is what it looks like here, but that's actually what it looks like. So you have coffee, cuisine, directions, and contact. All right, and under cuisine, you've got breakfast, lunch, and dinner. It's not at all inconceivable that under breakfast, maybe you have another menu. Under lunch, you have another menu. Under dinner, you have another menu, etc. So in other words, you could make this as simplistic or as complex as you wanted to or needed to. All right? So if I come in here and I copy this and I go right back to what we were just working on and I throw it into the body, all right, this may end up looking terrible, and that's okay. All right, but you notice we don't have our nav bar set up so that it goes horizontally, it goes vertically, but you can see by looking at this how breakfast, lunch, and dinner are underneath cuisine. All right, so it really didn't take any amount of effort to do that. Whoops. All right, then you configure the CSS. So if I added this CSS, I'm not going to do that, but if I did that, that would take what I just showed you and it would make it horizontal rather than vertical. All right? Okay. Next, they get into the CSS transform property, which is the bottom of page 489 and the top of page 490. As it says, it lets you change the display of an element. What you do in this example, can everybody see what's on the screen right there? Can you see how the picture of the lighthouse is kind of tilted? That's not a mistake or anything. They basically used a transform in order to be able to do that. All right? Or what is it, transform, or is it, yeah. And then they talk about scaling to transform, etc., and they go through that. Transition, whether you realize it or not, I showed you that a little bit on the example that we went through. Do you remember when we had the button on the project that we did as a class the other day, the Wild Wild West scene? And when you put your mouse over any of the icons, how they turned color and they moved up a little bit and then they moved down again? That was a transition. And there's different ways. When we transition, we just used ease in out to show you the slow transition. If you go back to that and you change it to ease in, or you change it to ease out, or one of these other ones, you'll see a marked difference in the way that it looks. All right? Now, I'll tell you this, again, I don't think this is funny. This isn't meant to be funny, but be real careful if you're going to have a site that's got a lot of animation, when you make stuff real jerky. And the reason for that, you may or may not have thought of this, but especially people who have mental illnesses, that can actually drive them into seizures when you do too much of this kind of stuff. They've actually had documented cases where that's happened. All right. All right, they give you a practice with transitions on pages 493, 494, and 495. And this is sort of another example of an image gallery. with this example, because what you do here is you click on any one of the pictures. These are thumbnails, and when you click on the thumbnail, the big picture comes up over here. So they run through an example of how that can be done. You probably have seen that before, all right? Especially back at my old house in Illinois, for a while, maybe I've told you this, maybe I haven't, but I karaoke. And the place I was karaokeing at, the guy who was there, he took vacation for a month. So I knew I'd have to go someplace else because they weren't going to have karaoke. So I started going online and looking at bars, and with a lot of these bars, they'd have a couple hundred pictures that were thumbnails. And you could click on any thumbnail and boom, it would blow it up to full size. That's the kind of thing they're talking about right here. All right, next they jump into, and this is the bottom of page 495, and it goes on to 496, 497, and 498. They talk about Java. When you are in your fourth semester here, so we're talking about the spring of whatever that is, 2018, all right, you will take a Java class. It's going to be my responsibility. That's going to be an unbelievably intense class. I'm not saying that to scare you, but what I'm going to try to do is in the first half of the class, give you everything that I typically give classes in 2 semesters. We've got a fairly big book, and I'm going to go through bits and pieces of almost every chapter that's in it. All right, and make you as good a Java experts as I possibly can. I'm probably going to deviate from what Evan does. I'm probably not going to give you as much homework. The way I've done this in the past is we do a program as a class. For every chapter, we do a program as a class, and then you get assigned one. You turn both programs in. They're both worth the same amount, whether it's 10 points, 25 points, or whatever. But if you are here in class when we do it, you have the one done. All right, if Amin's sick, then he can always go look at home and he can look at the tape, the video and do it that way. The reason for doing it that way and to try to slam as much into you as possible is in the first 40 days you become, quote, Java experts, unquote. And in the second 40 days we use Java, and as a class, we're going to build anywhere from 2 to 4 Android applications. And if you've got an Android phone, you're going to be able to literally take what you've done and copy it to your phone, and you'll be able to show people what you've done. One of the things that we're going to do, and one of the ones I've been working on, then there are copies of these out there, but I don't like to use what someone else has done. I at least like to change it up a little bit. But one of the ones we're going to do, anybody ever have as a kid have the old Magic 8-ball? Where you got that and you shake it up and am I going to pass this test? Most certainly, type of an idea. We're going to create one of those. All right? And we're probably going to set it up so that when you work on it, you use something that's called the emulator. So you're using something built into the machine. This is not a joke, because I've had people do this. When you test it, I don't want you to pick up your laptop and start doing this. I've had people do that in classes before. And unfortunately, it was with a desktop, and it was with the monitor. And I'm like, what are you doing? I'm testing my program. No, you're not. You're ruining the monitor. Don't do that. So we'll use an emulator, but we'll look at the code for when you actually put it on your phone. You'll be able to take it, shake it like that, and that'll give you the answer. All right, and it'll look pretty much, it'll actually be an 8-ball. And one of the reasons I want to do that, and it's going to work really nice, and I'm putting in a little plug right now, so if any of you are interested in possibly doing this with me, what they've done for the last several years in St. Louis is they have these fairs in the summer where they bring in high school and junior high school kids, and I'm going to try to see if they can have one here this summer, and I'm going to have them do that. So over a week, we're going to build that application as a class. And I'm going to ask how many of them have an Android phone or an Android device and bring it, and then hopefully on the last day, we're going to have that done. That's going to be a hell of a concept to do that in a week. All right, but we're going to do the best we can to see that. So if any of you and I'll mention it to you later, but if it's summer and any of you want to come in for a week to do that, I don't know if you get paid or not. You get a Rankin shirt. I don't know if that's a reason to want to do anything. But, you know, if you want to, it's not one of these shirts either. It's a T-shirt. Usually it's a red T-shirt that says Rankin, and in the back it says professional grade type of thing. But Java is the language that we use. Right now, Java is the language that's used. Right now, Java is the language that's used to create both Java applications, Java applets, and Android applications. That's what Java is used for. Now, you may or may not have heard, but the language that's used for iPhone and iPad apps is called Swift. Previously, it was a language called Objective-C, which was a nightmare. Believe me, I know Objective-C, and it's one of the hardest languages I've ever seen in my life. Everything in that language is a pointer, and if you don't know what a pointer is, that's good. All right? But with Swift, it's not a simple language, but it's very simple compared to Objective-C. And Swift is going open source, which means they're going to take all the code for it, put it out there on the net so anyone can use it. The talk is within 2 years, all right, probably by the end of 2018, beginning of 2019, at the latest, and maybe before that, you'll be able to build Android applications or iPhone applications in Swift, which means they'll eventually merge together, and you'll be able to use the same language, build yourself an app, and you'll be able to run it on either type of device. That's going to, at least, like I said, that's going to be a while before that happens. I'm looking forward to that day because I already know Swift pretty well. I've created several applications already in Swift. And I'd like to do that because that way, if we can get ourselves an iPhone or iPad emulator, now you'll be able to build stuff using Swift and use it for either one. So you'll be able to tell people, hey, I built this app that'll work on an iPhone. I built this app that'll work, on an Android device. That's going to make you even more marketable. No. One of the things I've volunteered to do is to come in and teach a Swift class. The problem with that is right now you need a Mac. All right, and there's no other. There are things online that say, well, you can do it without a Mac, and it's true. When you are learning Swift, you can use something that's called a playground, and literally what happens is that your screen splits in two, and instead of being in half, the last half is about this big, so it takes up about that much of your screen, and you type stuff in here, and it shows you the results over here. So you can do that on an Intel machine, on a Windows machine. But right now, you can't write Swift code, all right, on an Intel machine, other than doing it that way. That's the way that it's set up. And I don't, there would be way too much of a cost hardship to expect people to go out and spend, even if you buy a Mac Mini, which you can do, and you can get one for $400 or $500, you can use a Mac Mini. You can't, right now, I don't believe you can program through your phone. That would be really hard anyway, unless you've got really, really good eyesight. I mean, I could never do that. But, what happened was, where I used to work, we got a grant for the school that was almost $1 million, and I got a certain portion of it. And I said, well, what I wanted was I wanted them to buy 12 Mac Airbooks, all right? And then we got it up to 15. We had 24 in the class, so basically 2 people had to share one was the way it usually worked. And then we also bought about 15 Android tablets, the same kind of thing. So is it possible? Yes. All right, and I could even create a class that would teach you Swift. And when I say this, the stuff that you write over here, it can be graphical. So I could show you how to create an entire interface. The only thing is it wouldn't be operational. So you have this really cool interface and you learn how to build it, but you couldn't do anything with it. See what I'm saying? We could do that. The biggest problem that we're going to have here is the hardware classes, and this is still a hardware lab, the hardware class here and here, they run all summer long. Because when I ask them about doing that, they go, well, it's going to be hard because we don't know if we can give you a lab. They don't even know if I can bring the high school kids in here because they don't know if they'll have a lab available. And they've already told me if we do that, we might have to send you one of the labs downstairs. So I don't care, you can send me the other building. I don't care. But if we can do that, that's a possibility. I don't know. So it would be a class, it would be a credit class if we are able to do that, but it wouldn't apply towards the credits for your degree. Does that make sense to everyone? Because I don't want people to say, well, I took this class, so now I don't have to take the Java class. No, that's not true. But it's possible. I've been trying to bend Charles's ear on that, and he's a hardware guy. You know, so it's very hard for me to keep giving him all this software stuff and having him say, oh, that sounds good. Yeah, we'll do that. All right. So it might happen. It might not. I have no idea. But Java, try to keep this simple. The way that it works, just so you know, in most programming languages, okay, that are both interpreted and compiled, you interpret first and then you compile. Okay? And I'm going to give you my real quick definition between what's different between those. All right. So I'm walking down the street and Ethan comes up to me and he wants directions to something. The unfortunate thing is that he speaks French, which I don't speak. I speak English, which he doesn't speak. Okay? So the good news is Drew walks by and Drew is very fluent in both French and English. So Ethan says something, I don't know why he's not helping him, but he wants my help on it, okay? So he says something, and if he just keeps talking and talking and talking and talking, and every time there's a word in there, Drew's like, I'm not sure what this word means. He writes it down, all right? And then he's got a French to English dictionary, and when he gets done, and then Ethan's done talking, he looks up all those words, and then he does everything, and he shows it to me. That's a compile. But if Ethan's talking to me and he says a word and Drew doesn't understand, he goes, wait a minute, stop. And he's got to look it up in his dictionary right there. And then we can continue on. All right, that's an interpreter. So most languages are either interpreted or they're compiled, or they're both interpreted and compiled. The language that we'll go through start to go through in a few weeks, JavaScript, is interpreted. All right. Java is compiled, but Java is one of the few languages I know that compiles first, then interprets. Most interpret first, then compile. When you compile, you're breaking everything down into the zeros and ones the computer understands. But Java, what happens is it compiles first, and it compiles your program. So if I've got a program that's called Hello World, all right, and I go and I go in and I compile that program, it creates a file for me that's called helloworld.class, CLASS. That's what's known as a bytecode file. Then when I run that file, it does, all right, so it's already compiled, it does the interpretation where it sends it over to the zeros and ones the computer can understand. All right. Now maybe that was a long story, but I just wanted you to hear it. Years ago, every game that you saw online was done using a Java applet. All right, and again, I've got a bunch of programs that I've already written. I literally have hundreds of them that I've written. When we get to that part of the class, like the real simple ones, I'm going to put them all out there. You're going to have all of them. All right. Now, if you go for a job and they say, gee, is this your work? And you say yes. Well, I'm going to have no way of knowing that you did that. But if you're lying, just believe me, your employer will have a way of knowing you did that. And the reason I'm telling you that is I had a student in the past, it wasn't my work, but as I found out later, what they did was they took work off the net, made very, very simple changes to it, and called it theirs. That's a real bad thing to do because it's pretty easy to get caught. All right, they didn't change some of the comments, and the person was interested, so they Googled the comments and they found the program out on the internet that someone else had created. Needless to say, they didn't get the job. All right. Today, there's other languages that can be used other than Java for creating games, so applets aren't used as much. The difference between an applet, just so you know, the majority of the stuff that we'll do in that class is we'll create Java applications, which means you run them right from your machine. With a Java applet, you run them from a browser. All right, so that's the main difference between the two. There's a bunch of Java and Java applet resources in here. All right, so you can look at those. JavaScript, this is what we'll do next semester. If you've never seen this before, you're going to end up writing code that looks like this. This isn't a great example, it's an example, it's okay. Oops. You're going to write, no, of course I lost it, the code that looks like that. And if you say, I have absolutely no idea what that means, it's okay. What that's basically going to do is this is going to create what's called a new date object. All of those, even though the author doesn't show it, should have semicolons at the end. All right. This is creating a new date object. This is grabbing the month. This is grabbing the day. That's grabbing the year. And then it's going to write it out. So if it was today, it would write 9-23-2016. That's what you're going to be doing. All right. But what it does is it allows you to bring interactivity to the web. This right here is something, depending on your point of view, you're either going to learn to love or you're going to learn to hate. It's an pictorial overview of what's called the DOM, D-O-M, or Document Object Model. If you can become a proficient JavaScript programmer and can prove to people that you understand the DOM, what that means is you can take anything on any web page that exists and do anything you want with it. Any word, any paragraph, any picture, anything. And people I know who have that ability are never hurting for work. Many of them are self-employed, where they kind of rent themselves out or outsource themselves to people and make boatloads of money. All right. So we'll talk about that. Here's some JavaScript resources. Ajax I already mentioned. Anybody ever seen this? I may have shown this to you in here already. I have no idea. Oops. Doesn't look like I ever showed it to you, but you never know. Did you ever do this? I'm going to come out here where it says new release rentals. I don't know if you've ever gone out to this site or one like it, but if I take my mouse and I put it over here, everybody see what happened? That's Ajax. Part of my page is refreshing. All right? Not the whole page, but part of it. You ever gone out to Google Maps and zoomed in or zoomed out? It's not redrawing the whole screen. It's only redrawing what has to be redrawn. That's Ajax. It stands for Asynchronous JavaScript and XML. Even though XML isn't used as much anymore, today more often than not they use something that's called JSON. And JSON it's an acronym.